sending Doug that because I thought it was such a joyful choir.
It
And I
was.
love all their costume changes, and I like hearing people sing from other countries, knowing that God is all over the universe.
Yes.
Let's pray for illumination. Beloved God, open our hearts to your healing word, our minds to your informing word, our souls to your renewing word. May we be strengthened to live out your love in word and deed. Amen. The reading is from Genesis 37 this morning. It's a little long. This portion of Genesis focuses on Joseph, who is his generation's more than any other represented, who in his generation more than any other represented Israel as a people who struggled with God and man and overcame, and he becomes a source of blessing to the nations. Through the life of Joseph, the covenant family becomes an emerging nation in Israel, setting the stage for the Exodus. That's just a little information. It begins with Jacob, who is also called Israel. So when you see them interjected, God changed Jacob's name to Israel. So beginning with verse 1, Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. He had another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in his heart, in his mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. For he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where can I turn?" Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped his robe in the blood. They had the long robe with sleeves taken to their father, and they said, "This we have found. See now whether it is your son's robe or not." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. A wild animal has devoured him." Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loin and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Then his father bewailed him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. The word of the Lord.
Thank you, Linda. So Joseph overcame immense difficulties in his life that would have probably crippled the faith of a lesser man. So how did he do it? Years ago, there was a TV show called The Honeymooners, one of my favorite shows, actually, and looked like the reruns up. You remember that, Tony?
Oh,
Yeah. Art Carney played one of the characters on the show, Ed Norton, and kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, but fairly slow-thinking worker in the sewer system of the city. So Ed Norton once summed up his philosophy of life with these words: "When the tides of life turn against you and the current upsets your boat, don't waste those tears on what might have been. Just lie on your back and float." Today I want to introduce you to a man who repeatedly saw the tides of life turn against him, whose boat was upset more than once, a man whose difficulties would have crippled the faith of a lesser man, but he didn't sink. He didn't even float. He overcame and rose above the waves of adversity. He overcame these difficulties because of his philosophy of life, a philosophy of life nobler and wiser than that of Ed Norton. So the story, who is this man? His name is Joseph. We're introduced to Joseph when he was a mere 17 years of age. He was born, put it mildly, to a dysfunctional family. His mother Rachel is dead. His daddy Jacob is now an old man who hasn't always been godly. Jacob had 2 wives and 2 concubines, from which he fathered 12 sons and an unknown number of daughters. And they're all living pretty much under the same roof. That would have been difficult enough for some families to handle. But things were a little more complicated for Joseph. His brothers don't much like him. And I'm not sure to blame him much, really, when you think about it. There was a time Joseph had been out in the fields with his half-brothers, the sons of his father's concubines, Bilhath and Zilphath. Joseph apparently observed these boys doing something that they shouldn't have, and he told on them. He told Dad. Add to this the fact that Joseph was Daddy's favorite boy because his mother Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife. And his favoritism became painfully obvious when Jacob gave him the fancy coat. Imagine taking one of your children out to buy them the fanciest winter coat that they've always wanted. But then you take your other kids to Goodwill and buy them something off the rack there. How do you think they feel? Every time Joseph put it on, the coat reminded the brothers that they weren't loved nearly as much as he was. And then to add insult to injury, it seems that even God favored Joseph over his brothers. God gave Joseph a couple of dreams. In the first dream, he sees his brother's sheaves of grain bowing down to him. His brothers knew what the dream means, that he will have dominion over them in some way, and they hate him for it. In the second, envisioned the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down before him. And that one, as we heard, his father even rebukes him about that one. So apparently it was these dreams that finally caused his brother's anger to really boil over. And we're told in Genesis 37, 13 and 8 to 19, Jacob said to his son, "As you know, your brothers are grazing flocks near Shechem. Come and I am going to send you to them." And of course he replied, "Very well." But his brothers saw him way off in the distance before they even reached him, and they plotted to kill him. So here comes this dreamer, they're thinking. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him in one of those cistern pits and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." These dreams made Joseph's brothers so angry they could hardly think straight. And their hatred and jealousy was so strong that the first thing they wanted to do was kill him. But the oldest, Reuben, reasoned with them. "You don't want to have his blood on your hands. Beat him up a little bit if you have to, but don't kill him." So they took hold of Joseph, ripped off the coat they hated, and threw him in this nearby cistern. And I suspect that they intended to leave him there till he died. Apparently they had not given up the idea of killing Joseph outright. Because in the 25th verse following it says, "As they sat down at their meal, they looked up and saw the caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with all kinds of things, spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt." So Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." Like I said, Joseph had a very dysfunctional family. For the next 13 years, Joseph spends his life in slavery and prison. At the end of his time, he has 2 children while in Egypt. In Genesis 41:51, Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, "God has made me forget," and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble in all my father's household." In this 52nd verse, the second son, named Ephraim, doubly fruitful, he said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." In other words, Joseph didn't just lie on his back and float through life. He felt pain, he suffered, and he knew grief, and he knew sorrow. You would think that Joseph's life would have made him very bitter and resentful. Consider what it would have been like to be the young man who was hated by your family, torn away from your father, carried away to an alien culture with no hope of ever returning. Could you blame him if he just turned his back on everything he believed and just curled up somewhere to die? When faced with the tragedies like these, Ed Norton's simple poem sounds like a mindless drivel, that is, when the tides of life turn against you and the current upsets your boat, don't waste those tears on what might have been. Just lie on your back and float. Sure, that'll help, won't it? But you remember the story of Joseph, you realize that Joseph's suffering was great. He was never defeated, nor despondent, though. When he was sold into slavery, he became the best slave that he possibly could be, and eventually was placed over all the master's household. Then when his master's wife falsely accused him and he was thrown into prison, he became the best prisoner he could possibly be, and he eventually made a trustee over other prisoners. So he never gave up. He never surrendered. He always persevered, and he always overcame. And it wasn't because he just laid on his back and floated. Oh no, he didn't lay on his back and float. He rather knelt on his knees and prayed. He bowed before God and he trusted. Now, like his brothers did, there are some who might say that Joseph was a dreamer. Some might say that he was a hopeless optimist who simply ignored his circumstances and mindlessly floated through life and hoped things would turn out all right.